Hello, everyone. Welcome. Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending where you're joining us, which part of the world. My name is Lela Mosamkulishvili. I am connecting today from Tbilisi, Georgia, and it's evening here. It is my pleasure and honor to facilitate and moderate this session. The relational effects of ayahuasca. And today I am joined with two guests, and I will introduce them. The first is Adam Aronovich, who is a PhD candidate in medical anthropology and global health at the Interdisciplinary Medical Anthropology Research Center in Catalonia. Also, I hear let me mute one of the rooms because I hear noise. So, sorry everyone. So Adam is also workshop facilitator in a retreat center in Peruvian Amazon called the Temple of the Way of Light. And he's also a member of the Ayahuasca community committee at Chacruna. And Adam really fuses his practical work with a qualitative inquiry to investigate what are the effects of ayahuasca that transcend rather individualistic focus. So welcome, Adam. Please tell us, where are you currently located? Where are you joining us from?
Hi, Lila. Hi, everybody. Right now, I am in Mexico. Puerto Vallarta. It's a nice resort on the beach. So my family lives very close by. And this is where I chose to spend my pandemic with my family. So Mexico, yes.
Great. Thank you for joining. Let me also first introduce our second guest, Leor Roseman. Leor is affiliated with the Imperial College London, where he attained his PhD degree, and currently he holds a position of postdoctoral researcher. And he looks into psychosocial potential of psychedelics, and currently namely of ayahuasca, and with an emphasis to look what are the potentialities of psychedelics for peace building. Welcome, Leor. And where are you joining?
I'm right now in Israel. So I'm in my parents-in-law house. We're visiting. So I live in London, but we came a few weeks ago to Israel, and we're in a lockdown right now.
So you had to go through the quarantine, I can imagine.
The whole country is in lockdown.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining. Let me also get a little glimpse of our attendees. I can only see the number. We are totally 112 individuals in this virtual room. So I want to ask everyone to type in the chat. I call it a sequence of identities. So basically, ethnic, religious, or national identities that throughout your past you either were born into, were socialized into, choose voluntary or had to perform, or in any way you came to identify yourself with. Just very briefly on my own example, I was born in Georgia, in Tbilisi. By ethnicity, I'm Kartvelian, but more than half of my life I've spent in the Netherlands. By citizenship, I am Dutch. Religious-wise, I was baptized as Orthodox Christian. I was agnostic, and for past years have been practicing Buddhist. So the chain of the sequence in my case would be Kartvelian, Dutch, Orthodox Christian, agnostic, Buddhist. So I invite everyone, attendees, just type in the identities that at some point in your life you identified with, or maybe you currently still identify. It will allow us to have a little insight of the audience. And please make sure to type it to all panelists and attendees so then everyone can see it. And before the first answers will flow in, I will remind you that we will use chat for interaction, and we will use Q&A to collect direct questions to the speakers. So I already see global citizen, spiritual, Spanish, daughter of a strict atheist. I'm first generation American, ethnicity Cuban, Puerto Rican, have Indian and Afro ancestry, practice Buddhist, born in Amsterdam, Dutch, non-religious, academic, Netherlands, Caucasian, agnostic, beautiful, Finnish, Christian, we are really diverse group, and as we proceed, you will also see Jewish, Buddhist, Christian, atheist, beautiful, European, secular, spiritual. This is awesome, really, to have such a diverse group. That's why I asked everyone to share this sometimes rather problematic identities for us individuals, is because in my humble opinion, the both talks today cut through the identities and in some way partake to what I can say is making the rigid boundaries of identities more fluid and allowing dialogue, allowing connection between sometimes identities that are sometimes constructed in a way that they exclude each other. So without further ado, let me pass screen, let's say so, to Adam and ask Adam to introduce his study, his work. Adam, the floor or the screen is yours.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of weird doing this online via Zoom. But yeah, I guess that's what these times call for. Yesterday, actually, I was facilitating a group share via Zoom with a group that had come to the rainforest exactly 1 year ago to participate in an ayahuasca retreat that I facilitated back then. So as a 1 year anniversary, they asked me to facilitate a virtual meeting, a group share where they could reconnect with each other. I mean, they have been connected all along. They are very, very tightly knit through a WhatsApp group, regardless of where they are in the world. And as part of their group share, I asked everybody not only to tell how they are and how they were feeling and what's happening with them, but also what have been the main challenges that they had faced in that 1 year, since they attended the workshop. So the main challenges that they face, integration issues, but also like the things that have been beneficial for them. And almost unanimously yesterday, I think there were 10 participants in that group share. Almost unanimously, people said that the main challenges that they're facing and the main things they've been struggling with are loneliness, isolation, a sense of disconnection. And I mean, all of these things nowadays make sense to all of us, I guess, or to most of us, because of the obvious global situation that we're in with the pandemic. But the pandemic is by no means the origin or the cause of this existential loneliness that many of us feel. And this just exacerbates an already existing and continuously exacerbating situation where many of us, most of us in Western cultures and Western societies are living increasingly more lonely, isolated lifestyles, and we're really, really craving that social connectedness with each other. So for the group, that was the main challenge, and not only because of the pandemic, but just because the ways that their lives are set up. So for the last 4 years, I've been in the rainforest in Peru facilitating ayahuasca workshops, working with many groups that come through. But not only working there facilitating, as you mentioned, I'm also conducting a few different research projects. The first one that I did, or the first one that I collaborated with, was a qualitative study in collaboration with ICEERS. And we're looking specifically at the therapeutic potential that ayahuasca can have for people that are experiencing depression, anxiety, trauma, grief. Part of that research is, a big part of that research for me are interviews. So I've conducted dozens of different interviews with people after the retreats, and my interviews are semi-structured, so they don't follow a script. What I'm really interested in really is like people's experiences in their own words, in their own narratives, what happened for them during the retreat, what were the things that they found particularly beneficial or insightful. But looking at ayahuasca as a focus, specifically geared towards these diagnostic constructs, depression, anxiety, and so on. In the beginning, I would ask questions like, "Hey, how do you feel that ayahuasca will help you or is helping you deal with depression or anxiety, or what are the main most important insights that you receive during ceremony, or like focusing a lot on that space, the ceremonial space where ayahuasca happens, where people are under the influence of the plants, and we have like all these visionary states and metaphysical transcendental experiences. And after a while, I started noticing that for a lot of people, when they were asked to describe what were the most important takeaways or the most meaningful moments that they had during the workshop, they weren't necessarily talking about ceremony, and they weren't necessarily talking about ayahuasca. More often than not, people are talking about their interactions with each other, the connections that they made in that group. Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable how you get like a group of strangers, and this sense of communitas really arises fairly quickly after a couple of ceremonies, after sharing like dramatic, emotional, spiritual experiences. Some of the group dynamics, the group sharings, for example, are extremely powerful. And that's one of the things that a lot of people pinpoint as being particularly beneficial, just like the group share, the opportunity to really, I mean, as facilitators, we do try to curate that space in a way that really encourages people to be extremely vulnerable, very authentic, to communicate how they're feeling, where they're at in a way that is, like just very authentic and vulnerable. And for a lot of people, those are first experiences of any sort of interaction like that. Yeah, I mean, these are not the kind of environments and situations that we find ourselves very often in our society. So just having that opportunity to really be heard, to be witnessed in all of our pain, in all of our suffering, in all of our struggles, in all of our human vulnerabilities, in our humanity, just, simply as that, to really be witnessed in all of that, and to be able to also be witness to other people sharing their own experiences of struggle, suffering, overcoming, healing, growth, and so on and so forth. These are things that are incredibly, extremely powerful for a lot of people. So, so I started noticing that the social connectedness component, yeah, the element, the human element, oftentimes will take precedence in people's narratives over other aspects, which I, probably more the transcendental. And I mean, ayahuasca is useful for many things. Yeah, it's not to the value, the immense value that, really that mystical experiences have, or even more focus on the intrapersonal, the psychoanalytic aspect that nowadays is fairly common in these environments, to focus on really ayahuasca as a tool for introspection and for, as it were, kind of like a therapy thing. Yeah, but oftentimes the social component really takes precedence over all of those other things. And at least what people remember, what people take away with them, really, oftentimes it's just the connections that they made, the moments of vulnerability, of authentic connection that they share with other people. So from these insights, I was talking to Leor actually. I was talking to Leor about some of these insights, and we came, together we came up with this idea to focus more on the context, on the social environment, on not only on ayahuasca as a substance devoid of, different, but just all of the different factors that really make up the workshop, what it is. So we came up with other study that I'm now doing also in collaboration with Leor and Imperial College, but focus really on the setting as a whole. More on the social component of a workshop, and not only on what happens during that ceremonial space. How am I doing with time? Okay. And yeah, this is one of the main things that is very important always to stress, and this is one of the first things that I always tell people when they come to the rainforest. Yeah? This is one of the ways in which these systems of medicine, and I mean, ayahuasca, traditional uses of ayahuasca in the rainforest are wide, and there's various different uses, but one of the main ones has been for many tribes, particularly that element of social cohesion. Yeah, ayahuasca is not necessarily something that is used only for psychologizing it, as we do oftentimes in the West, but actually something that is very important to maintain that group cohesion, to maintain social relationships and kinships healthy and thriving. I guess as we tend to medicalize these experiences more and more and more, we also lose the risk of losing sight of the other things that are also very important beyond our own predilection in Western cultures for extremely individualistic approaches, where the healing process is always about what's wrong with me, how can I get better, how can I heal, me. In that sense, it becomes kind of like this obsession with the self, But that's not true in the original context from which ayahuasca originates, where people are way less obsessed with self and the macro dramas of their own personal lives and much more aware and putting much more importance on actually the relationships. Yeah, the relationships between people within the community, but also the relationships between the human community and the non-human community, the nature at large, yeah, where this notion of personhood in Amazonian cultures is much broader and much more expansive than that we have in the West, where a person is pretty much a human person. So in the rainforest, you also have bird people and tree people and plant people and river people. And part of that collectivity, or that relational aspect of ayahuasca, is that ayahuasca acts as a bridge to really maintain all of those relationships, reciprocal, mutually responsible, and healthy. So yeah, I mean, I choose to focus on the relational medicine, the relational aspect that ayahuasca can bring to us, because yeah, loneliness, isolation, disconnection from each other. I mean, these are not just experiences that are prevalent in the West, but they're actually major contributors to depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. I mean, we're running rampant epidemics of loneliness in Western societies that are also a major cause for these other rampant epidemics of depression, anxiety, and just general mental and emotional disease. So finding ways in which we can be more connected to each other, and which can really create these environments where we can be authentic, where we can be vulnerable, where we can be witnessed and witness others in all of our humanity, and have the depth of relationships that is needed for us humans, social animals, to really be healthy and happy. I think this has to be a priority of any environment that is seeking to heal, or any healer or practitioner that is seeking to heal. So this social prescription, as it were, I think is important. So yeah, I guess that's the main message that I want to transmit. Just not losing sight, of the importance of our nature as social animals, the importance of feeling connected to each other and connected to the world at large as a community, reciprocal, mutually responsible communities has. And nobody can be fully healthy and happy unless everybody else is healthy and happy. This is just how things work. And it is important to always keep track of those very important connections between the health of the individual and the health of the community, the health of the individual and the health of society, the health of the culture, the health of the environment which sustains us. Like we're not gonna be really happy and healthy unless everybody else is also happy and healthy, because that's just how the nature of social mammals work. So
thank you so much. Thank you. It's very inspiring and very insightful. Just very quickly, how do you think the insight that you have gained that ayahuasca can facilitate this really creating social bonding, or also not only really between individuals, but more with the environment, be actually translated outside the rainforest? Because currently you do work in the rainforest, in the retreat center. So maybe it is easy to give that sense to people who come and stay there. But how can that be translated in this context when we see the medicalization of ayahuasca? If it's possible to translate.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think this is like one of the challenges that we face when we try to translate practices that are rooted on ancestral wisdom, on different cosmologies and different ontologies and different ways of understanding the world. As we translate those things and we adapt them for our own unique needs as Western subjects, their own practicalities and intricacies of our own Western neurotic minds, I think it is important also to pay a lot of attention to the original cultures and traditions from which these practices originate, because they have a lot of things to teach us about how can we maximize the potential of these tools, of these allies, and not reduce them only to very specific things, which is one of the risks that we run medicalizing these practices. I don't know if that answers your question.
It answers, but there is one follow-up that I want to directly pose, maybe really poking. Is it possible to receive that benefit of this bonding without shifting an ontological perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. I mean, we don't need all to become animists, as it were. Yeah, it's not like people are. I mean, really, we can't. Like our ideologies and cosmologies are very deeply entrenched already in who we are. We perceive the world in certain ways. We can relate to animism as a philosophy or way of life, but it's very difficult to experience the world in such a way. That's what I found for myself. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to like completely shift our cosmological awareness. It's just about paying more attention to the interrelatedness of things, of the interdependence between different beings, and how we're not isolated from the rest of creation and everything is intertwined.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think this is a very nice bridge to also introduce Leor, and whose work really ties into the topic that you so beautifully opened up. Leor, please take the screen floor away from us and present your work.
Cool. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. So thank you, Adam. I just want to say that I met Adam at Boom 2016. We both volunteered in Cosmic Care, and Adam was my team leader, who was amazing. And we had lots of altered states of dialogues, and it's a great source of inspiration and motivation. So thank you, Adam. Hopefully this is reciprocal. And so I'll talk about my project of peace building. And a few years ago, I decided that I want to investigate through relational lens the potential of psychedelics for peace building. I teamed up with Antoine Saka, who's a Palestinian peace activist, and Natalie Ginsberg from MAPS. We received funding from Moshe Tov Krebs and from MAPS. So Antoine and myself, we went for a month-long road trip in Israel and Palestine. Natalie joined for a few days, and we interviewed many Israelis and Palestinians who drink ayahuasca together. Those groups are made for regular kind of Western ayahuasca intention of psycho-spiritual growth and communal connection, and they're not with the intention of reconciliation or conflict resolution, but we wanted to investigate a potential, and these were hippies in our hearts, I guess. But very fast, after a few days, Antoine and I had developed a lot of doubts, actually, in the project, and we were sitting at midnight after a few days of a long day of interviews, sitting at midnight at the car park and kind of holding our heads and kind of like feeling awkward, and maybe this is all a quixotic adventure and we're like extremely naive. And what we heard was actually amazing stories, really beautiful and touching stories of oneness and connection and love and harmony and peace that is felt in the air and intercultural exchange through music. And all of these were actually very amazing and touching stories, but the ideology of most of the people we interviewed was strictly apolitical and avoiding discussion of national identities. Which is the kind of core of the conflict. So they were suggesting that the medicine, that ayahuasca is universal, it is beyond identities, it is beyond left and right, beyond Israeli and Palestinian, beyond occupier and occupied, beyond victimizer and victim, and so on and so on. So we were wondering how transferable is this oneness from the group and the community and the circle to larger social political reality. Many peace researchers are actually kind of aware of this tension when they study dialogue groups, and some peace researchers call it the irony in harmony. So the idea is that a group that's embedded in an asymmetrical conflict, if you create a sense of harmony, you can create actually an illusion of equality, which prevents trying to change the larger social-political reality. And this is something we observed in the groups that we studied as well. And of course, those groups are there's drinking ayahuasca for the personal level, relatively therapeutic level. So also engaging in politics can confuse this, and facilitators would rather avoid of making like it also political, and that makes sense to some extent. But we somehow decided that we continued, and we sensed a certain political undercurrent that exists in the groups, and we continued with what might be a quixotic adventure, but still there was some energy that drove us to continue and interview more people. And this political undercurrent I would call for now prophetic processes. but I'm not sure about the name. And but imagine the prophet as a strong, also spiritual, but also political. He can channel anger in a spiritual way. And many scholars kind of put prophecy as comparing it to the mystical union, which is the mystical union is about oneness, acceptance, and love, and beyond moral obligation. The prophet is in a more like political figure. Of course, this distinction is not clear-cut, and many so-called mystical practice actually also engaged in prophetic energy, and I think the psychedelic culture is one of these. So the prophetic event is divided into two. The first is the revelation, receiving a message or receiving a vision. And this already, Rick Strassman compared phenomenological comparison between DMT state and biblical prophets and showed quite a lot of similarities, like receiving a message. And also Alan Davis from Hopkins showed that in a large online study that from 69% of those who have DMT entity encounter also receive a message. But besides receiving a message or beside the vision or the revelation, the important part that I would like to focus is the delivery of it. So we focused using micro-phenomenological interview on these moments. I will share one of these because time is short. So the group that of this story is mostly Jewish. There are few Palestinian participants in this group. The practice of ayahuasca is also participatory and relational, which means that there are parts of the ceremony in which participants can bring themselves by singing or by sharing prayers, and that creates a lot of interpersonal, intercultural exchange in the group. And actually it creates a strong communal bonds. So this group has a strong communal bond. They drink every few months, and they also meet between them. So they meet also outside of ceremonies. Those who are drinking the group for a few years, they practice for a few years, and actually they're going through a process of apprenticeship. And many of these groups become facilitators after a few years. So Fatima is also on that path of becoming a facilitator. Fatima is a Muslim Palestinian woman that lives in Israel. She is drinking for a few years for personal reasons and for unmediated connection with God. The ceremony took place in Yom Kippur. It is important, probably the most important Jewish holiday. It is the Day of Atonement, of fasting, of praying, of asking for forgiveness of sins. During the ceremony, Fatima sees a vision, kind of a relatively mild vision of her daughter. Her daughter was raised in the Jewish Israeli education system, and Fatima is worried about, there's few things she's worried about regarding her identity and the complexity of it. So Fatima sees her daughter in a darkness that is closing on her, and she tries to save her, and she puts her hand in the darkness and pulls her daughter. When she's pulling her out, suddenly she sees a very strong revelation, which is one of the transformative ayahuasca moments she had in her practice. In this revelation, she's saying, something closed and I was higher, and what came out of me was the opening paragraph of the Quran. And she says she's channeling this opening paragraph of the Quran, and with a very strong confidence voice, maybe even almost, she's saying almost like a masculine energy that's coming out of her. And at the same time, she's saying this strong revelation. The revelation includes intergenerational war and pain in the land, it's related to the conflict of past generations and of future generations. She sees also mothers who sacrifice their own children for the war, who sacrifice their own DNA, and she sees Mother Earth, Pachamama, with blood dripping into Mother Earth. So this is kind of an eco-feminist blood dripping into the earth. The pain of the earth and the pain of women is something similar, is something that a few other Palestinian women actually also experienced with the same kind of prophetic energy. So while she's seeing this revelation, she's in the same time also delivering it. She's saying that she became what she saw and released a frequency of anger. When I sang it, I was fully present, no right or left. It came from a center, in a voice of, I can't say in the voice of God, but in the voice of deliverance. Listen and awaken. There's a battle here between light and dark. So this is kind of the energy she's bringing. She's kind of channeling also anger. She's trying to bring also certain criticism to the Jewish Israeli participants and the energy of reparation. She's kind of trying to say through her singing that Yom Kippur is not just about fasting, but also about reparation, which means correcting the deeds for a future. And this has a political undertone which relates to the liberation of Palestinians. Through this event, which was very pivotal to the group at the moment, many people were purging at the moment. Many people came to her in the morning and told her they kind of received her message quite strongly. And through this event, she became a subject. She became subjectified to the event, and she developed a certain loyalty and a mission from there to continue some type of peace work. This direction also brought her psychological relief. And the peace work she's doing is attempting to liberate Arabic language from the oppression of the Israeli state, and working with women to take more responsibility on the situation. So this is kind of a strong direction, which is related also to the vision of seeing mothers who sacrifice their own children. I met her a few times since then, kind of follow-up interviews 1 year later and 2 years later. And it's always wonderful conversations. And she always insists in something that was puzzling for me for quite a while, that although the vision and the revelation and the energy are embedded in the particularities of the conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the energy is a universal energy. So it's an emancipational force that came out of her that brings also a universal energy of liberty, of equality, of peace for all. So this process was similar to others, was rare, but similar to those who had it, which begins with a recognition of something that was excluded. In this case, it was the Palestinian identity, which was kind of excluded for the ceremony, from the ceremonies, and there is a recognition of that, which brings also a revelation, a vision, which relates to the history, and a delivering of truth, an energy of delivering of truth, subjectification, which means developing loyalty to this moment, and then trying to include what is excluded. So the prophet sees himself on the stage of history, working on the stage of history, and working also in the material world. But the question is, how transferable is this to larger socio-political reality? And this is, of course, a difficult question. I believe it does, because the developing of a sense of mission and loyalty is transferable to larger socio-political reality. The problem is that the interpretive framework of such events can actually limit the integration of them to larger society. And right now, psychedelic therapy and New Age, which are very, very strongly aligned, the interpretive framework is focused on the self, like Adam said. So this is inner spirituality, self-ethics, mystical union, and above all, acceptance as the interpretive framework. All of these can limit the integration for larger change. Therefore, a relational framework that includes community, society, politics, and so on, can actually accommodate not just the experience itself, but how it is transferred and the energy of transferring it to larger reality. This energy people might call it sometimes messianic, but suppressing it as mere messianic and trying to kind of marginalize it actually can prevent larger change. So I would like to end with prophecy, or a hypothesis or prophecy. But before that, for those who are fasting and observing Yom Kippur, which begins very, 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 very soon, Gmal Chatima Tova. So I'll end with this hypothesis or prophecy, right? So psychedelics are mind manifesting tools, as we all know. The mind or the psyche of the marginalized can be occupied by social struggles, of course. Therefore, if psychedelic mainstreaming would succeed in increasing accessibility to the marginalized, then what we will see is the social struggle manifesting on the therapeutic couch. So the integration of these prophetic processes should not be by replacing anger with acceptance, but learning how to deliver this into larger change. Subjectification and meaning stem from a mission to include what was previously excluded. It is insights that drive us, whether they are psychological or scientific or artistic or political. This is the form of integration that will require recognizing what we kind of already know. Walter Benjamin suggests that there is a spirituality in a class struggle, even in the material one, as it is aspiring for future correction and redemption. It's always hopeful for future correction and redemption. He calls this the weak messianic power. This is endowed upon us by the hopes of the previous generation for us to fulfill their unfulfilled revolution. This is the spirituality of resistance, which is the undercurrent of the psychedelic movement. Peace.
Beautiful. Thank you, Laura, so much for the presentation as well as for the prophecy. I have just one question, and I would like to also read. There we have already a few questions. How is the situation now? I heard that you were going to continue the study, so to observe the similar groups. So just to update, what is the state? And the main question I have is about accessibility. What can you tell about the social group itself, whom you have been studying, and what was the ratio there? For instance, Israelis and Palestinians. Can you say about the composition of the group? Because you told really compelling story of one participant. I was really moved. But can you tell me more about the group itself?
Sure. So we studied a few groups, and most of them Palestinians were minorities, and I think that's probably minority also in the quantity of how many participants, but they were also in the ceremonies and also outside of the ceremonies, but there were always tensions around that Palestinians has the less kind of spiritual capital. They're less associated with the psychedelic milieu, and they're kind of always a bit of outsiders, regardless, like related to their Palestinianhood, but also through fashion and stuff like this. So they're a minority on different levels. Most of the ceremonies were in Hebrew, and the mother tongue is, of course, Arabic of Palestinians. Yeah, but there are few ceremonies that there were more equal, half-half, and hopefully in the future we would see more of these. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I will then read the questions that came in. We do have 4 minutes. This question is to Adam, is that, do you think the medicalizing ayahuasca has more benefits, such as clinical efficacy and social acceptance, or more downside, such as clinical setting that is less centered around relationships in the long term?
That's tricky. I mean, the whole concept or idea of medicalizing ayahuasca already is very tricky. I mean, how do you bring the whole experience to the lab? I mean, ayahuasca itself is difficult to homogenize and standardize because there's such a widely divergent ways of preparing it and dosing and so on and so forth. To answer your questions, I mean, I advocate for the medicalization of psychedelics in general, because I think that they have good potential that overshadows the potential, disservice that we would do to these things, particularly when it comes to ayahuasca. I think, for example, when it comes to clinical efficacy and social acceptance, there's a lot of people in this world who will never show up in the jungle and drink ayahuasca with an indigenous healer in that kind of like setting, just because it's very well removed from their comfort zone. And I think like being out of the comfort zone is probably one of the most important aspects of healing anyway. But at the same time, it is also okay for people to have access to these things in a way that doesn't take them too way out of their own comfort zone. I mean, I think about my parents, for example, or, like people like that who would benefit greatly from drinking ayahuasca or eating mushrooms or anything like it. But I know that they would require a much more medicalized environment to really feel confident, you know. And if we have to trade the symbolic value of the indigenous healers with all the paraphernalia for the symbolic value of a Western doctor with a coat and the stethoscope, I mean, it serves the same function to some extent. So yeah, but I mean, we can't really lose sight, as you say, about the centering, about relationships in the long term. But I think that's more, not necessarily the experience itself, or more the integration and the skills of whoever is providing that service in guiding or helping that person navigate the integration process, in focusing on what really is important for them in their lives. So that's not, I mean, that's not necessarily about the medicalization, but about just the skill and the approach of whoever is following up on that process with that person in particular.
And I need to interrupt you because I see we're just on time. So also I would like Leo to post the link if you have it already available in the chat, so everyone to the multi-room. If not, attendees can see it in Hoover, so we can just take our discussion there. Leo, can you copy the...
Yeah, I just see that somebody posted in the chat.
Already, perfect. So I encourage everyone to move to the, well, we can only be 30 people, so move fast, first come, first serve. Thank you both so much for very interesting, insightful presentations. Bye, everyone.